The world is in a very dangerous moment. There is a very real possibility of nuclear war, and numerous studies by scientific experts have estimated that if large numbers of nuclear weapons were to be used, it would probably mean the death of the vast majority of humanity in nuclear winter as billions of people starve to death. The Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, which is a watchdog group that was created in 1945 by Albert Einstein, Robert Oppenheimer, and the scientists who helped to create atomic weapons in the Manhattan Project. This group maintains what's known as the Doomsday Clock, and every year they update their warnings as to the possibility of nuclear war. And in 2024, they warned that we are at a moment of historic danger, which they estimated is 90 seconds to midnight. And why did these nuclear scientists warn that we're in such a dangerous moment? Because of the war in Ukraine, which is a proxy war between NATO and Russia. And of course, NATO is led by the United States, and the US and Russia have the largest reserves of nuclear weapons on Earth. And these nuclear scientists warned that the doomsday clock is, quote, the closest to global catastrophe it has ever been, end quote. They also warned that, quote, humanity continues to face an unprecedented level of danger, end quote. Now, while nuclear scientists are warning of the very real danger of nuclear war, what is the US military doing? Well, of course, it's providing billions of dollars of weapons and military support to Ukraine. But the US military is also researching the potential impact of a nuclear war on Russia. I'm not joking. I wish this were a joke, but this is absolutely real. Before me here, I am looking at the website sam.gov. This is where companies can find opportunities for contracts with the US government. It's all publicly listed information. And this September, sam.gov published a contract titled Services for Modeling the Effects of Nuclear Weapons on Agricultural Systems. It discloses that the US Army Corps of Engineers is awarding a contract for research and development of a program that consists of, quote, modeling the effects of nuclear weapons on agricultural systems, end quote. And this is using software called AgriShock, which it notes models the effects of nuclear weapons on agriculture systems. And the study must, quote, demonstrate modeling of nuclear warfare on a global scale that would lead to destruction of the agricultural systems such as farms, end quote, and this modeling must include former Eastern Bloc countries, with bloc spelled wrong, and it also must include regions beyond Eastern Europe and Western Russia. So the US military wants to know what would be the impact of a nuclear war with Russia, not only in Eastern Europe, but in the entire world. What would be the impact on global food systems? Well, we actually already have an academic study that was published that answers this question. This was a study published in 2022 by leading scholars at universities around the world, led by Rutgers University, which is actually based in the US. And what was their conclusion? I'm reading here from the Rutgers University website. Nuclear war would cause a global famine and kill billions. It notes more than 5 billion people would die of hunger following a full-scale nuclear war between the US and Russia, according to a global study led by Rutgers climate scientists. The scientists found that if there were a full-scale US-Russia nuclear war, global average caloric production would decrease about 90% 3 or 4 years after the conflict. And just 2 years after the start of the nuclear war, more than 75% of the entire planet would be starving. This peer-reviewed study was published in the leading scientific journal Nature in 2022, It has 10 co-authors who are some leading scientists around the world in multiple countries. And I'm reading here from the abstract in this scientific paper. Atmospheric soot loadings from nuclear weapon detonation would cause disruptions to the Earth's climate, limiting terrestrial and aquatic food production. It would lead to mass food shortages in almost all countries. And they estimated that if there were a nuclear war between India and Pakistan, more than 2 billion people could die. But if there were a nuclear war between the US and Russia, more than 5 billion people could die, which of course is the majority of the world's population. And by the way, I should point out that many other academic studies have come to the same conclusion. This has been known about for decades. On the U.S. National Library of Medicine website, this is a U.S. government-backed institution, they have an academic study published in the 1980s about nuclear winter, reviewing the many scientific studies on this issue that details how a major exchange of nuclear weapons could result in a significant contamination of a large portion of the Earth's atmosphere, leading to a nuclear winter in which billions of people die. This is not new. I mean, there are so many movies about this. But clearly, the US military didn't like the conclusion of those studies, which is why it's offering a multi-million-dollar contract to do modeling so it can get a different response, maybe a response that it likes to hear about the possibility of nuclear war on Russia. We are in a very, very dangerous situation with the warmongers in Washington and in the Pentagon who are hell-bent on trying to defeat Russia, to overthrow the Russian government. And the danger only escalated further in November when the Biden White House gave permission to Ukraine for the first time to use US-supplied long-range missiles to launch attacks deep inside Russian territory. And immediately after Washington gave this permission to Kiev, Ukraine did launch attacks deep inside Russian territory. And the only reason that Ukraine can do this is because the United States is providing the long-range missile systems and the missiles themselves, and the US has trained Ukrainian soldiers on how to use these weapons. So the US is massively escalating this war. Now, this comes at a time when many Western media outlets are saying very clearly that Ukraine has been losing and is on the verge of defeat. The average age of Ukrainian soldiers on the front lines is between 43 and 45 years old. And even CNN has admitted the situation is very dire. CNN is, of course, as pro-Ukrainian and anti-Russian as a media outlet gets, and it reported that there is very low morale in the Ukrainian military. There are mass desertions happening, and thousands of soldiers are simply disobeying orders in Ukraine. And in past situations like this, when one side of the war is very clearly losing, that side often becomes very desperate, and that's why Ukraine is invading Russian territory, trying to launch long-range missile attacks inside Russia. These are signs of desperation, and they're very dangerous because they make the possibility of escalation into nuclear war more likely. Now, I've previously done reports here that look at how the majority of people in the United States and also in many European countries want peace talks to end the proxy war against Russia in Ukraine. A poll published in June found that 94% of people in the US and 88% of people in Western Europe say that NATO member countries should push for a negotiated settlement for the war in Ukraine. Although I should point out that this study was conducted in a very strange way, so they allowed multiple answers. That's why it was 94%, but the total sums to actually over 130%. But regardless, the point is that the majority of people want peace. But the supposedly democratic governments in the West are not actually responding to what their people want. Instead, they are escalating this war. and talking about the potential use of nuclear weapons, which is absolutely insane. In fact, the New York Times reported in August that the Biden administration has ordered U.S. military forces to prepare for potential coordinated nuclear confrontations, not only with Russia, but also with China and North Korea. We are living in a madhouse. According to the New York Times, President Biden personally approved this plan in March. It's called the Nuclear Employment Guidance Strategy. And the Times says that this, quote, seeks to prepare the United States for possible coordinated nuclear challenges from China, Russia, and North Korea, end quote. This also came after Reuters reported in June that a top Biden administration official raised possible increased deployments of U.S. strategic nuclear weapons. This report cited the top U.S. national security arms control official who said that the U.S. may deploy more strategic nuclear weapons in coming years in the name of so-called threats posed by Russia, China, and other adversaries. He said, quote, absent a change in adversary arsenals, we may reach a point in the coming years where an increase from the current deployed numbers is required. And he added, if that day comes, it will result in a determination that more nuclear weapons are required to deter our adversaries, end quote. And the U.S. government is also spending more and more money on nuclear weapons, tens of billions of dollars per year. In the last budget introduced by the Obama administration for 2017, it allotted $34 billion for nuclear weapons. That number drastically increased under Trump. In Trump's 2019 budget, it was $40 billion for nuclear weapons. In his 2021 budget, it was $48 billion for nuclear weapons. And under Biden, it has continued growing rapidly. For Biden's 2023 budget, there were $53 billion allotted to nuclear weapons. And for the 2025 budget, it increased drastically to $69 billion for nuclear weapons. By the way, this is according to the data that was compiled by the excellent researcher Stephen Semler, who has a really good Substack called Polygraph that you should check out. And he monitors how the U.S. government has been funding the war in Ukraine, funding Israel, and has a lot of other very useful charts. He also showed how the U.S. Congress has authorized $123 billion in military support for Ukraine between 2022 and 2024. In just 3 years, $123 billion of U.S. military aid for Ukraine, which, by the way, is more than the total U.S. military aid provided to Afghanistan in 20 years. This is how dangerous this arms buildup is and this proxy war against Russia is. And specifically, in terms of U.S. spending on nuclear weapons, Columbia University Center for Nuclear Studies estimated that over 30 years, the U.S. government will be spending $1.2 trillion on nuclear weapons. And that was in 2017 dollars. If you adjust for inflation, that means that in the next 3 decades, the U.S. government plans to spend $1.56 trillion with the TR, trillion, on nuclear weapons, which, if were used, would destroy humanity and kill the vast majority of people on Earth. And what's so crazy about this is that for the warmongers in Washington, they complain that this is not enough. So the conservative think tank, the American Enterprise Institute in Washington, which is funded by the weapons industry and many big corporations, they complained that even $1 trillion is not enough spending for the U.S. military. They want more spending on the military and more spending on nuclear weapons in particular. Now, I've talked about how the Biden administration has escalated the extreme danger of potential nuclear war, and the Democratic Party is deeply involved in this warmongering. But I should point out that this is completely bipartisan in Washington, that many Republicans are pushing for the same. And former President Donald Trump is just as guilty for this very dangerous situation that we're in. I need to emphasize this because some of Trump's supporters claim that the proxy war in Ukraine is a war created by the Democrats. But in reality, Trump and the Republicans also bear a lot of responsibility. This is completely bipartisan, like most of the worst crimes committed by the US empire. Let's not forget that when Trump was president in 2019, he boasted of withdrawing from the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, the INF Treaty, that was signed between the US and the former Soviet Union, which opened up Pandora's box and basically started a new nuclear arms race. When this happened in 2019, even British state media, the BBC, which is very anti-Russian, was very concerned about how dangerous this decision was by Trump. The BBC noted that Trump's decision to withdraw from the INF Treaty raised fears of a new arms race, which is exactly what happened. It was entirely predictable. Now, for people who don't know, the INF Treaty had been signed in 1987 when the Soviet Union was still in power. And this was between Ronald Reagan, the arch-conservative Cold Warrior, and also the Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev. And this banned missiles with ranges between 500 and 5,500 kilometers. And the idea was to try to prevent a nuclear war between the US and the former Soviet Union and now Russia. But Trump completely destroyed that agreement. As if that weren't enough, a year later in 2020, Trump withdrew from another agreement with Russia, which was the Open Skies Treaty. This had been agreed to in 1992, so after the Soviet Union was overthrown, between the Clinton administration and then Russian leader Boris Yeltsin. And the idea of the Open Skies Treaty is it allowed aerial surveillance in both countries to make sure that the US wasn't preparing for war on Russia and Russia wasn't preparing for war. That agreement was sabotaged by the Trump administration. He destroyed all of the Cold War era arms treaty infrastructure that was aimed at trying to prevent nuclear war between the US and Russia. And meanwhile, as Trump was tearing up all of these arms treaties with Russia, he was also approving the sale of lethal weapons to Ukraine that even Obama, who had started the war in Ukraine by backing a coup against Ukraine's democratically elected government in 2014, even Obama had said that he would only send so-called non-lethal weapons to Ukraine, which aggravated the conflict. But Trump further escalated it by sending lethal weapons to Ukraine, which he knew would be used to fight against Russia. And then Trump did an interview in which he boasted that he had sent lethal weapons to Ukraine, whereas Obama only sent Ukraine pillows.
You don't know what I talked about with Putin in the meeting prior to the press conference?
Publicly. You never say anything harsh about him publicly.
Excuse me, I didn't? I'm the one that gave Ukraine offensive weapons and tank killers. Obama didn't. You know what he sent? He sent pillows and blankets.
The reason I mention all of this important historical context is that a lot of Trump supporters are acting like that now he won the 2024 presidential election and is coming back to the White House in January 2025. They claim that he's going to immediately bring peace to the world. He's going to end the war in Ukraine. But in reality, if you look at Trump's record in his first administration, he actually massively escalated tensions with Russia. This is bipartisan. So the point is that both political parties in Washington and the military-industrial complex, the Pentagon, the State Department, all have played a role in bringing us to this very dangerous situation where they're talking about nuclear war, despite the fact that scientific experts warn that a nuclear war between the US and Russia would lead to the death of the majority of people on planet Earth. I mean, I don't know what to say. I can't think of anything more dangerous than that. Sometimes I really do feel like the world is an insane asylum, but that's why I created Geopolitical Economy Report, to highlight these very important issues, that unfortunately are not getting enough attention. Mainstream corporate media outlets are not taking this issue seriously enough. And in Washington, many warmongers are just flippantly talking about the possibility of nuclear war as if it's not a big deal, as if nuclear winter is not a possibility, when it very much is. So on that note, I'm going to conclude here. I'm Ben Norton. This is Geopolitical Economy Report. Please like and subscribe. Please share this, and I will see you all next time.